Hey, g'day there. It's Malaki here again. And part of my commitment to myself to learn a new skill in this COVID self-isolation is learning a new skill. And so I've really enjoyed chatting to people in my professional network. And I'm grateful that I've got another person, guest, I guess you could say, that has joined me today. So that's Luciana. How are you this morning?
Very well, thanks, Malaki. Good to see you.
That's the way. Yeah, likewise. So we met on LinkedIn and through mutual business connections. And so you've got a vast range of experience, more than I even knew as I was writing up your profile, just looking through LinkedIn and your website. We're just chatting before we press record. But 30 years basically experience in business. It sounds like you grew up in business too, which I'm looking forward to hearing more about. But basically at the moment, an executive coach and consultant. Originally with a background in linguistics and psychology, you've been involved in both government and private sectors. And I was really surprised actually when I saw, well, not surprised rather, I guess I was really impressed when I saw that you had an MBA from Griffith way before MBAs were, I guess you could say, a dime a dozen, and that's not a heaping any negative on MBA. Everyone has them, I guess. So I don't know how valuable they are, but you could probably speak more into that later. But yeah, look, I really appreciate you taking the time out to chat. And I guess it's a difficult time that we're in, given we're all locked up in our houses and restricted on where we go.
Yeah, just a little restricted, but that's a good time too. I mean, we can use that in a way to reflect and as we're doing, learning new skills. That's a good thing about it. Yeah,
100%. Yeah, and so we didn't actually chat about it before we started recording, but I just put some of your passions in there. Travel. I got from your website that you actually do an executive retreat. It looks like to Italy, and you've been other places as well. Maybe just talk to us a little bit about that, and because that sounds really interesting.
Okay, a retreat's usually a time for reflection anyway, so that's why I call it a business retreat. And I just invite and work with people who want to focus, and usually it's CEOs or it can be teams, to focus on themselves or on a particular product, a problem. And I have a framework which we work through, and it's based on the Medici idea, really, of having a whole lot of diversity together to solve problems.
Interesting.
So it's the Medici concept is the reason why the Renaissance happened in Italy and nowhere else, because it was at a time when they brought together a whole lot of diversity without really realizing that's what they were doing. But it meant that they found new connections at the intersections of fields, so that they brought artists together with engineers, and engineers talking to chemists or scientists of the time. And it was through that those ideas flourished. Now we do that anyway in our world sometimes, but that's what the retreat focuses on. It focuses on finding new ways of thinking at the intersection of fields.
Interesting. Man, so many questions just sort of popped into my mind as you were explaining that. How did I guess jumping straight into it, how did that come about? Like, again, just...
Well, I'm Italian anyway, so...
Bonus if we can go back to Italy. Yep, I thought that much.
No, but I remember as I was growing up that it was very fashionable, because I was born here in Australia, of course, but it was very fashionable for my friends to and families of friends to say, "Oh, what does your father do?" And I always felt a little uncomfortable with that, because I hated Dad had a few things going. He wasn't a banker, he wasn't an engineer, we had farms, we had businesses. So Dad was doing a few, and Mum and Dad were doing a few different things. I couldn't put them in a pigeonhole, and I used to get very frustrated. And then, of course, when I started to learn about, you know, the Renaissance and Leonardo, and I was still young. I was still in primary school. I used to think, well, why can't I be like that? Why can't people be, you know, painters and sculptors and work in, you know, the science field? Why can't you be all of those things? And I remember thinking that very clearly as a little girl. So I started to, I guess I just, you know, started to think about the Renaissance, read up on it, and I came across a lot of literature and realized that that's, and then when you look at and do the analysis of, well, why did it happen in Italy rather than anywhere else? Why was that the first place? I mean, there, you know, it's traceable to their society at the time and the way it was organized and what was happening in business and society at the time. And it was all these intersections of new knowledge sort of talking to each other. Now we know that, we know that in business too. That's why we value diversity in business. But this is sort of focusing on it in a reflective way using a particular framework that helps that creativity come to the fore. Yeah.
Interesting. Wow. So it wasn't, you know, something that you just, because you've been in business for 30 years, it wasn't just all of a sudden, I've just got this new idea, like I have a background like in that country. It was more like, I guess you could say a bit of a dream of yours and something that you'd heavily believed in. And then all of a sudden with business, you were able to enable that. That's really fascinating.
Well, when I was working overseas, I had the fortune to work in 17 different countries on very different projects. And of course, I had a lot of diversity in that experience. And that was, I think, the thing that really clinched it for me. And I was doing a lot of facilitation and working with teams to sort of work in strategic planning, to work in problem solving, to work in developing skills and competencies and teams, and to mentor people. Yep. So I did a lot of very diverse projects with very diverse teams where it was challenging because typically in a room of 100 people, I may have 60 different nationalities. So English was not the first language for most of them. English was a working language. And so we worked in, you know, more than one language quite often. But that, I think, was the thing that really made me realize that, yes, and it made me think again about the Renaissance and what I'd learned. And I thought, well, these are really like mini pockets, what I've been doing. So I could actually use that experience and develop a framework for actually doing it in a more conscious way, I guess, with groups and with.
Oh, you there?
Experience, but it also is and a very enjoyable one, I hope, because I like to do them in places that have like Venice for me is akin to resilience. Yes. It is resilient. It manifests resilience. It's you know, you look at the source of Venice, the origins of Venice, the way it has to survive anyway. It's threatened by water constantly. Now it's threatened by the virus, of course. So, yes. You know, it'll bounce back. It's done that for hundreds of years. So, you know, I like, and I'm from that area. So I like to run them there anyway, because people think about Venice as romantic, and certainly it is romantic, but it's also a very resilient area of the world.
Wow, that's so fascinating. Yeah, I love hearing just the journey of how you got to that point, I guess. And we spoke about it a little bit before we started recording, but you grew up essentially around business. And so do you think that exposure assisted with that journey and with regards to how you, not only how you got to the retreats, but your journey insofar as, okay, you're a consultant and what you've been doing?
Yeah, I think so. I think when I look back, I think my thread and my theme has been I've had to be resilient. For you know, I was a migrant, the child of migrants, so yes. Migrants have had to learn to be resilient. And I guess when you grow up in that framework, it's something you just have to live. You know, you either survive it or you don't.
Yeah.
So I learned resilience, and my parents were involved. I mean, I grew up on a poultry farm of all places.
Wow.
And at that stage, when I was young, very little, it was still a live trade. So we used to live trade. We used to take live chickens and roosters and whatever else was required to our customers. And they were all the way down the coast. They were 200, 300 kilometers away at times. And so you do a trip down and meet all the customers' needs. But then my parents had an opportunity because the market changed, and we put up the first abattoir for
Wow.
actually processing chickens and chickens and sending them to market, in a frozen state, which was new at the time. So it was innovative. So I guess, yes, that thread of resilience, innovation, and finding solutions to problems runs deep. Yeah.
That's so good. I'm always interested to hear how people are not only navigating this current season, but how they got to their current business or position. And so I'm always interested in hearing those stories. I guess just changing gears a little bit in terms of, the current state of affairs, all of those things like packaged together in terms of, your business and where you're going right now, like how have you been affected by the current circumstances, and what's some of the things that you've found that have actually worked for you in this particular climate?
Well, I think this climate is always, and it's not the first time I've faced a recession with the work that I do. The last one we had was the well-known, global financial crisis, of course. But, and of course, the work that I do tends to fall off at this time because it naturally does. People look inwards to their organizations, and then, they're cash strapped or budget strapped. And so these are the first areas to go. So I'd like to offer my experience, my expertise in any case, and that keeps me interested. It keeps me meeting people. It keeps my skills going, and it keeps me connected to people, which is really important. I'd like to offer, some what I call fireside chats to anyone who just wants to bounce some things off someone else who has a diverse experience in problem solving, in working at strategic levels, but operational levels as well. One of the things that my co-workers tell me is that I'm good at toggling between strategic and operational and pulling those two, helping those two things come together. Because often, the strategic area, sometimes it's not clear what you do at the operational level to try to pull those two together. Or, there are barriers along the way sometimes to achieve what you want. So that's what I'd like to do, and I'd like to offer free 10 to 15-minute consultations for anyone who wants to have a fireside chat about something.
That's so good. No, I love that. I mean, I'm learning so much.
Coming into winter anyway, so
yeah. I like that term actually. Yeah. I mean, I'm learning so much just like chatting to you already. So yeah, surely there's anyone out there that wants to take advantage of that. Well, I'm going to include the links in the bio below. So definitely either reach out directly to Luciana or let me know as well, and I can facilitate the introduction.
That'd be great.
But I like what you're saying about weathering the storm through the GFC 2008. And before we started recording, we spoke about like you have been in business before and you have been through a similar, I guess you could say, financial or economic downturn. And I think it was when you were running a business before. Just talk to us about some of the things that helped you during that time, because you could argue that, like, I want to be sensitive, obviously, to a lot of people out there who either financial stress and all that sort of stuff or don't have a job. But the reality is there are a lot of things that we can do, and you could argue that, with the state of the internet, there's a lot of things that you could facilitate in terms of business or just upskilling and learning and stuff. So, the recession that you went through that we were talking about before we started recording, you had some really good just insights in obviously you weathered that. So yeah, maybe just talk through some of those things, like what was the business and how you were able just to pivot through some of the times there and came out on the other end.
Yeah, well, it was during the 90s when we had the recession, when interest rates were 18%.
Oh, wow.
So that, trying to meet payments when you didn't know what you'd wake up to the next morning in terms of interest rates, because they just went up and up very quickly over a couple of months. Inflation just went crazy.
Wow.
But so we had to really look at our business model and figure out where there might be opportunities to actually use the processes that we were aware of and knew about and had to follow to try to make that work for us more. And we did that. We did that by using the processes and actually the financial system. We were able to have the insights that we had and be able to use the financial system that was open to us better. Yep. And actually make some money during that time just on the exchange rates. Now that's a high risk thing, but you know, when you know a system and you're not in it and you know a system, then you also know what your risk is and you know how to mitigate the risk. So I think there's some of the things you learn. You learn that as our good old Tom Colonel, who's walked the distance of his garden length for the world, has said, yeah, we will come out of this. We will. And we've just all got to knuckle down. I think we've got to stop whinging and just look at what the opportunities are. I think I didn't realise we were such a nation of whingers, actually, till I'd started to watch some of the news and listen to some of the discourse. And so I think we've just got to take a step back and stop whinging so much and look at, okay, what are the systems that we've got? How do we actually use those to actually help ourselves or help others, you know, because that's about as much as the two things go together. When you're helping yourself and you're helping others, then you've got a win-win, and that's what it's about, isn't it?
100% agree, and like I'm very aligned with that narrative. Like we can all be proactive in our own way, I guess, and finding opportunities and taking charge. And there's obviously situations there where there's exceptions to those rules, I guess. But I mean, the reality is, you know, I mean, it's not a political stance or commentary or anything, but you know, we were chatting about this earlier before we recorded, is that I think our government's doing quite well, and there's a lot of things that they are supporting us with. And the reality is we're not in full lockdown. Like there's other countries that have it worse off, I guess. And so I think, you know, to dovetail on the back of what you're saying, I think a perspective check or a reality check is something that we could all benefit from, given, you know, we're still allowed to leave. We can still go and exercise. Businesses are still running, albeit there are some that have been impacted, but I think we're far better off than a lot of people may realise or see.
Well, I've got, as you know, I've got family in Italy.
Yes.
They've been in total lockdown, so they haven't been allowed to leave their houses. And I got a message from one of my cousins just yesterday saying, it looks like we are finally just starting to move to open some of the factories. Not everything, but some of the industrial complexes are finally being able to, not all of them at once, but in a, I suppose, scaled, they're starting to allow people to go back into those workplaces. So she said, I think that, because she said nothing's been open. I was talking to my daughter yesterday who lives in the States. Now, they don't have dry cleaners open. They don't have, the only thing that's open are chemists and supermarkets. She said nothing else is open here. Wow. Nothing else. So she said, if I can get you any clothes, if I needed kids' clothes, I'd have to go to Walmart because it's also a supermarket. So that's okay. But she said nothing else is open. She said, I can't get anything dry cleaned. I can't. So, you know, so if something goes wrong, I've got the supermarket wall, any normal supermarket plus Walmarts, because it's a supermarket and chemists are in that anyway. So, you know, everything in the one shop, she said, basically. So there you go.
Yeah.
But some people are a lot worse, and that's what I'm saying. I think we're lucky here because we can go for a walk. You know, we can still move around with reasonableness. We're not in tight lockdown. They're allowed to go 200 meters from their home door. And
Oh, wow.
so 200 meters is not very far.
Can't even go to the letterbox for some people, probably, if they're on a big property.
Right. That's right. So, yeah, so that's what she's been saying. Yeah. So they're allowed to walk there 200 meters up and down, up and down.
Yeah, we one of the big things that my wife and I have been doing is getting on TikTok, which I don't know if you've heard of that platform.
Yeah, I have. I haven't been on it though.
Oh man, it is.
I have to try it.
I would definitely encourage you. It's definitely a breath of fresh air. It kind of started off as something that my wife's a teacher, so literally all teenagers are on it basically. So it's like social media for their generation. However, it's starting to level up, and so anyway, she just got on it because she wanted to relate to them, and you know, they sometimes, you know, different generations, particularly the younger one, they just speak a different language, even though it's English, right?
They do.
So anyway, that's how it started off. She got on there, and all of a sudden, the whole world just opened up. Like she found that she could relate to them better, like relate to them on their level. And so I jumped on, and it's actually been a really good form of exercise. That's where I was going with this whole thing is I've just once a day, like again, it's part of my commitment to create content, albeit it's a different platform, but it's actually helped me with my exercise because doing a dance routine, like, because I do like dances and stuff, like it's a bit of a work for someone who's not very in dancing. Like I'm all sweaty by the end of it in the morning. So that's kind of been like my exercise in the morning. And it's actually a light platform too. There's a lot of, because it's short, sharp, just like 10-second videos, it's been very light. And I guess I've enjoyed it, like being on there, and I'll definitely encourage you. Yeah, it's worth.
Yeah, I'll have to give it a go.
Yeah, and I mean, it used to be like a platform only for a particular demographic, but it's actually starting to level up with businesses now too. So it's been interesting. I've been tracking that sort of progression as well. But either way, it's a fun platform to be on, and yeah, I recommend having a look, checking it out.
I've been doing Pilates on virtual every week. So because I used to go to Pilates classes, but I've been doing them virtually. So that's been that's just been through Google Chats, because that's what the organization that runs them is using, and that's been good. So that's been a bit. But yeah, I've received a couple of messages through TikTok, so I'll have to have a look at it. Yeah, it's
definitely worth it. You won't be disappointed.
Okay, that'll be my learning thing for this week.
There we go. Hey, well, thank you much for catching up today. I really enjoyed our time together, and I guess just as some departing remarks, we touched on it briefly before, but is there anyone in particular, in my network watching this, or yours as well, that they can particularly help you with in this time? So is there a particular, you did mention you want to start those fireside chats. Is there a particular like individual or a business or an industry, I guess, to be more specific, that an introduction would be well received?
Well, of course, I tend to work at in the corporate area, but I also work in the personal development area. So I'm a personal coach as well, development coach. So that's I think the beauty of what I can do. I can work in that corporate, so I can work and relate to the corporate level, but I also work with people individually. So yeah. That's always been the focus, so that's never changed.
Yep, no, that's good. Great. Yeah, I'm definitely going to include all the relevant, your LinkedIn profile in there. So definitely reach out directly to Luciana or even myself, and I can facilitate that introduction. But I hope you take care and keep in touch. And thanks for your time this morning, and we'll chat again soon.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, and good luck. Talk soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.